Gynostemma tea.
Crying out loud.
Is this tea? It's kind of like green tea, but
What did you call it? Dinosaur tea?
gynostemma.
Oh, gynostemma, not dinosaur.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand this, but basically it's like this ancient Chinese way of making tea where they take all of these leaves and brew them down into almost a syrup, and they mix them, and then they take that and put it into tea bags, and then you can make tea out of it. There's no caffeine, there's no sugar, nothing added. It's just like a green tea, but it's a super green tea because it's all these leaves, all these different leaves. It's like a claim to be a longevity tea. I like it because it tastes good, and since I don't drink caffeine, I feel like I do get a little bit of energy from it, a little bit of hippity hoppity, bippity boppity. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But
yeah. Hey, dinosaur tea in a store near you. Welcome to, or welcome back to, More in Common. This is our social experiment. See, everyone has a story that can help us learn from one another. And we bring people into this safe space that we have learned to create so we can learn about their stories and get into difficult topics that challenge us in conversation and ultimately how we think.
And we have a lot of these conversations, and we're seeing a lot of similar threads through all of them. So what we're doing is breaking down these conversations to create a set of tools and a map that'll help you become a conversation boss so that you can be a catalyst for conversation in your day-to-day life.
So don't forget, all things More in Common podcast can be found at moreincommonpod.com. But you can find everything, blogs, you can find podcasts, links to contact us, our village, and organizations that we support, and you can find them as well. So absolutely moreincommonpod.com. And if you're so inclined, leave us a review on your favorite podcast device, like this one from our man, Lock West Monster, who we released a year ago. He left us this kind review saying, definitely one of the best in-depth interviews I've ever had. Was excited about the process, and it lived up to it all. So, wow. As always, like the words mean a lot to us, and
need to reach out to him, see how he's doing.
We definitely do. We definitely do. So let's go back a second.
Okay. Let's go back.
JS, he was our last episode. What were your thoughts on that conversation?
My thoughts on the conversation are, be willing to take a look and go past face value. And it's very similar to what I said about the episode prior, Jeff Tippett. But, he's like, oh, I'm part of a satanic temple. And it's like for me, it'd be very easy to shut that down and be like, yeah, I don't care. Like, I want nothing to do with that, so I don't want to talk about it. But I thought it was a very intellectually stimulating conversation, and it was for me, and that's it. Like, if I wouldn't have continued on along the path of having a conversation with him, then I wouldn't have got that stimulation. I wouldn't have been able to force myself to think about some new ideas and some new concepts and challenge some of the things I think about, which either strengthen them or got me thinking, like, maybe why do I hold on to that? And so it was, that's what I took out of it. What about you?
That's all good stuff, as always. For me, it was, really a breakdown of there's a thoughtfulness in the way he approaches his life, and a thoughtfulness in the way he approached that conversation that really kind of demonstrates a good way to challenge your unconscious biases, right? He talks a little bit about that as well, but also for us in challenging biases we may have towards the idea that someone's part of the satanic temple, right? And as we learned with Dolly, you can't change them, but you can be aware of them and move through them, right? So I thought there was a lot in that conversation that did a good job there. And, this one really isn't so much about the conversation, but, since we did record it so many months ago, our evolution in having difficult dialogue, in exploring people's backgrounds and experiences versus that conversation. Like, I thought we did a great job, but I just love how we continue to get better and continue to improve in this area, kind of demonstrating our constant desire to get better, because this is never easy and there's no magic bullet.
That's a fair one. Thank you, man. I didn't really think about that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Today we are with Phil Terrill. Phil grew up in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. His upbringing was all about the pursuit of academic or athletic excellence, and he hit some of those targets. His life took a different direction after college at Tuskegee, starting in corporate America, entrepreneurship, and on a journey to discover himself. Along the way, he didn't realize that God had a very unique plan for his existence that would truly begin at an unexpected time after a life-altering decision. He then recently wrote a book, Collision Course, about his unexpected turn as he drives full speed into the journey of how he turned his life's most challenging time into a massive and powerful breakthrough.
Man,
what did we get into, Keith?
The importance of God and prayer in his life, and just talking about what that means to him, his relationship with his dad. We talk about that pivotal moment in his life that led him to write the book Collision Course. I won't spoil it. I'll let you get into that through the episode. And we talk a lot about him and his life and everything that kind of led to the accident that we talk about and that he writes about in his book. So it's really good, just rich dialogue and getting to know a man who's been through a few things, and how he's working to come out the other end a much better person for it. So we're excited to have him. Now, what strikes you most about this conversation, Rod?
I've said it before, but I'm gonna say it again. Keep going. Like, just don't stop. We're not defined by our darkest moments, and it's how we respond and how we show up after and what we do about them. And I think in this conversation with Phil, after we learn about his moment and the process, and it's not like a response right away. It's a series of responses and how you show up over time. And he talks about his path. He's just such a great example of this concept that can be very cliche. We're not defined by our darkest moments. It can be super cliche.
That's fair.
That don't mean it's not true. It's super true. What do you got for some
right
tips
at the beginning,
for us?
I ask him about prayer and God as a curiosity that I have in other people and what it looks like. And, it's funny. I've since used that question in other situations, and I've just learned how to delicately ask questions when you're curious and you're not exactly sure how the other person's going to respond. So I think that's just a really good flow in that section to just listen for on curiosity and asking questions. And then toward the end, we talk about being right and how everyone can be right. And it really is about the approach. I just think there's a lot to take away in that section of the dialogue. So just call it out to not be missed. So as always, we're here with Phil, and enjoy today's show.
This feeling of and I'll give it to you like this, like, have you ever done something and you're like, when you're done doing that particular activity, like, you feel really good about it, right? Like, you feel really positive, like reinvigorated or energized about it, and it's something in your being where you're like, today is, it's like when you see the sun, like when the sun's shining, like, you feel different. Right.
100%.
Yeah. And so it's like, for me, it's that type of feeling of like, I feel really good. And it's like a peaceful thing. And then there's a lot of clarity. And I think if you ever felt like you have a great sense of direction around something, that's how I feel when it comes to, like that elevated spirit of being.
Welcome back. We are here with Phil Terrill. Phil,
What's up? How y'all doing?
thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, appreciate it. Welcome to More in Common, you know?
I've been listening, so this is good. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So there's actually been a topic of conversation that we have not broached on this in our many episodes recorded, coincidentally enough. Now, in your book, Collision Course, right, you frequently reference prayer and God's influence on your life.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's often assumed that what this means, like based on cultural norms, people just assume what it means. But like for someone like me, I don't understand it, right? And I am ever increasingly curious to understand what this relationship is for people. I know it varies for different reasons. So love to, understand like how prayer and God manifest in your life.
Yeah, it's a great question. And in our family, it's actually an interesting conversation on a daily basis. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So like when I was growing up, my dad was in the Nation of Islam. And so, there's that level of faith, right? When you think about Islam. And then if you go deeper into like the Nation of Islam, there's a certain discipline that those followers of, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had. Same with Louis Farrakhan. Like it's just a different kind of structure to religion and faith and spirituality, and then the teachings, and sort of how that gets infused into like daily life in your regiment. And so then, like even growing up in that environment when I was younger, then my mom, right, she was more around the not I'm not going to say not into church and religion as much, but it wasn't as deep, let's say, as my dad was at the time with the Nation. And then there was this other thing with like my grandparents who were, they're Baptists, right? Like my granny's from Missouri, so she's just Baptist, and we go to church every Sunday. Like when we visit her, it's on. And so we just kind of, you learn about the Bible. Jesus is viewed differently than how it might be in the Quran with like the Prophet Muhammad. And so I got an interesting perspective of religion in that context, or spirituality. And then my sister, let's fast forward. Like my sister, she went to a historically black college called Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. And prior to Hampton, she was, practicing, the Christian faith. Everything was like consistent across us both. And then my sister actually converted. She converted to Islam. I think, I don't know if it was like her sophomore year of college, something like that. And so this constant dynamic around spirituality, faith has evolved over time for me, because I'm watching how people interact with faith and spirituality. And then, to answer your question, for me, it's been an interesting relationship, because like I don't necessarily believe that you have to go to church every Sunday, or Bible study every Wednesday. Like in a lot of the times in the people that are focused or on the Christian faith, they in my like in the African American community or the Black community, like that's kind of like the schedule. It's like Wednesday,
That rigor, right?
yeah, it's like Wednesday Bible study, Saturday choir practice, Sunday perform that song you were practicing, and then like Sunday school, like, and then you just keep going. And when I was young, I was like, I don't understand this, like, and I even like the concept of tithing, right? Like I was like, I feel like I'm paying for somebody, right? Like, like, and I always had
the concept of tithing, Keith.
I don't. I tell me.
Perfect. So I'll explain it to you, and then Rodney definitely like add in where I miss out. But in my concept of it all, it's like tithing is like, hey, I need to take a percentage. I think it's like 10%. Yeah, 10% of the money you make, right? And you are essentially saying, I'm giving that back to God, or
okay, no,
right.
I've heard it. Yeah.
And so like over time, I've had this perspective on religion that it's become commercialized, or it's a business, especially when I look at like large Baptist churches, the AME church, where like there's another part of my family who's really big in the AME space.
AME.
And yeah,
You know what it is? I don't know what that's.
AME, American. It's like not American. I think it's African Methodist Episcopal something. I don't know. I might have that all wrong. But something like that.
We'll look it up. Put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and I've always been like, man, I've always dealt with that battle internally of,
African
man, if I don't go,
Methodist Episcopal.
yeah. So if I don't go to church, am I like not adhering to my, like my faith or like my spiritual, like, I'm like, or my religion? I'm like, I don't think so. So my faith has been, I'm gonna pray to a higher person, because I do believe in that. Like, I'm not doing all these things by myself. And some people don't believe that, which is, totally fine. I don't focus on Jesus or Prophet Muhammad or whoever it is. Like, that's that figure that each religion has. But my thing has always been, look, Phil, you're doing a lot of great things. There's no way that you could be doing that by yourself. Like, you have a role in the in the activities, but someone is orchestrating that at a higher level, and is preparing you, whether you know it or not, to accept these different assignments as they come to you. And so that's kind of been my relationship, and it's developed over time, and it's taken step backs. But one thing that hasn't changed is, like, I just always have been committed that someone is with me all time, trying to pursue some of these great things.
What is like, and it's just something that I fundamentally don't, and I'm seeking to understand is like, what does that feel like that? And Rodney, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this too, because I know prayer is big in your household, and you've had a deeper relationship with religion than I have over time. But I'm just curious, like, what is that feeling like? What is that experience like? Talking to a belief that, because like I believe in something, I just don't believe that tangibly in it. So like, what is that like for you? I'm so fascinated by it, just because I'm curious to understand it more.
Yeah, for me, like this, I'm gonna say it's indescribable because it's not, but um, I have this feeling of, I'll give it to you like this. Like, have you ever done something and you're like, when you're done doing that particular activity, like, you feel really good about it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
you feel really positive, like reinvigorated or energized about it, and it's something in your being where you're like, today is like when you see the sun, like when the sun's shining, like you feel different.
It'll be
Hmm.
how I feel
Um,
after this interview.
right.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, for me, it's that type of feeling of, like, I feel really good. And it's like a peaceful thing. And then there's a lot of clarity. And I think if you ever felt like you have a great sense of direction around something, that's how
Hmm.
I feel when it comes to, like that elevated spirit or being or whatever. That's my feeling. But I mean, I'd be interested, as well, to
Well,
hear kind of what
I
you
mean, I
think.
agree. I think it's for me, it's for multiple reasons, grounding,
Hmm.
and and I think this has been proven over and over that humans we need we need we need something larger than ourselves to ascribe our purpose to. Like, if we're just looking inside ourselves, like, it's very hard to find purpose and meaning in ourselves. But for me, it is just very grounding, and it's changed a lot. Like, how I practice. Like, practice. I don't even know if that's the right word. Like, the way I connect to religion or faith or my relationship with God has changed many 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 times. Similar, like, not, I don't know. It's changed a lot in the last few years, um, or throughout my
Can
whole life.
can like I like, and I know we're
You want me to go
talking to
deep?
Phil, but like, yeah, go like
You want me going deeper?
go into
So,
that. Yeah,
like, grew up in
don't
the
gloss
Catholic
over it.
church. Like, my parents, they were raised in Catholic churches. I was baptized. Like, all my siblings and I were baptized, like, when we were born in Catholic churches. Went to Catholic school all the way through 5th grade, and um, then my mom actually kind of stopped practicing in general and parted from the church. And then my dad went to non-denominational Christian church, so did that. And then I've since been married in the Catholic church, um, and very similar to Phil. Like, I don't feel that you need to, or I don't feel that I need to go to church every weekend or every week or anything like that to practice. And I don't really have, like, I've never picked a church to practice at or to worship at here in Los Angeles. And really, the last 2 years of my journey of faith, if you will, has just been exploring my personal relationship with God. And it's been like my prayers have changed from like thank you, like I always say, I wake up and I say thank you, like that I woke up, because to Phil's sentiment, like tomorrow's not promised, so the fact that I woke up, I'm thankful for. But then exploring a relationship for me looked like a prayer that was a straight conversation, like who are you, like who am I, like why do I believe in you, like what is it that we are doing, what are we trying to accomplish, like just asking questions that I think I asked to other people growing up, and I really should have just been asking them to like the power that I believe in. So that's what it's been for me. But it's just been really grounding, and I'm a rule follower at the core. So like, I think it was really good for me at a young age to have the church, to have the structure and the social mores and the morals and all that. And I think also looking at where I am now, it's a little limiting in that, like, because I look for those rules, it's like, oh, I got to go to church on Sunday. I got to go to choir practice. I got to go to Bible study. And it's like, no, you don't have to do anything. So that's where I am with it. It's a very long answer.
I find it. No, I love it because, like, for me personally, it's a cultural struggle because oftentimes, like the things I follow, sports and other things, there is an often quoted or ascribed, like, I thank God, or prayers to you, like, and this is something I've struggled with lately. It's like, what do I say? Like, I'm not praying, right? And there was a small period in my life where I prayed every day. And what I found it for me was it's more of a form of meditation, like grounding, focus, attention. And I've just had such a hard time grasping an attachment to something else other than that focus, attention, and just a bigger purpose beyond myself, which I have a grasp to. So it's just one of those things that's common in our lexicon. We talk about it, we share it, we discuss it. And the other side of it is like the non-belief, but I believe in something, like in everything I know and understand about our universe and everything around us. Like, to me, there's something. I just don't know what it is.
You're more agnostic.
I don't know to pray. Yeah,
you're agnostic.
Yeah, and I don't know to pray to it. Right. So it's like prayer and thanking God. It's just one of those things that I seek to understand more because I think of it more from a psychological perspective than I do from a faith-based, and it's just, I love your answers, and I appreciate you obliging the dialogue, because I don't know if it's one that needs to happen, but I'm just fascinated by it to understand it more.
That thing you were just saying, like if somebody says like they're praying for you or whatnot, you're not sure what to say. Like, give an example. Like, what do you mean?
Like, let's say you've got a big thing. Let's look at it from the optimist standpoint versus, or let's say someone's sick in your family, like, or someone is sick in your family, right, Rodney? Mm-hmm. Like, or Phil, like a common response would be, hey, praying for you, right? Like, for me,
you're not sure how to respond
like,
to that since you're not.
I don't, like, there's this dissonance. Like, I think that's the thing I should say, but instead it's like, I wish you the best. Like, I struggle. Like, right. What is the thing? Like, that's not the right thing to say. Like, prayer,
well, why not?
like you're pray for you.
It's a well-intentioned thought towards another human being.
And it could very well just be, being around it my entire life. And, I have family members who literally write things down. It's their prayer box, and they hope for it to come true, and they put it in their box, and, and move forward in their life. But that kind of goes back to Phil, like bringing Phil back into for one of the things that I love about your book when you talk about this is it drives you to move and do something based on inspiration that you get through that prayer. It's not just, I want this, give it to me. It's, I want this, give me the ability to do it, and then I'm going to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely like that. It's also like, I think of it as, like when you, this is just for me, is like I always looked at it as, I don't want to let this thought about a higher power, like I want to let that whatever down, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when they've given me all these intangibles and all these abilities, and I can see that if I put in some work, then I can. And I'm going to use this word, and I use it loosely, but in this context, like I can glorify that investment of that higher person or being or whatever based on what they've given me. So it's like I'm giving you a return on that investment, and I've committed to that because of this faith, which is really what it is. It gives me the extra like juice, right, to be like I can do this, and nothing, whether it's a person, thing, emotion, whatever will stop that from, coming to fruition. And that's where, I lean on faith. And if it's whoever it is, God, Messiah, I don't care, right? But I know for me, it's somebody is helping me get from, one place to another and put one foot in front of the other. I'm like Rodney, when my feet, sometimes even before my feet even hit the floor, my eyelids open. I'm like, thank you. That means I have more work to do. Like my assignment at this point is not done, which is, I know we were talking about it before the show. Is like that's what the book was about. It's like I was afraid. Like I was like, I don't want to tell people this or whatever, just because of my own fears, I guess. And it ended up being an opportunity to help have conversation with some people I knew and some people I've never met before, right? And that's all about just stepping out on what people call faith.
I do want to go into the book. You mentioned your dad in the first answer, and
Yeah.
before our talk, you mentioned we asked you about justice, and you said it makes you think about your dad. What is
Yeah.
that? Why?
It's funny because the connection to the faith part is there too, right? So like my dad and I, we've been close forever, right? Like, it's just like dad, son for real though. Like we were like best friends. And growing up, my dad, he was like for us, he was like he was the human rights director for the city of St. Paul, for a decade plus, always doing like community action type of work, whether it's human rights, civil rights, community affairs. Like when things happen here in the Twin Cities in particular, like, responding to like the Philando, shooting, or, if there are, discrimination, and that's across all areas. Like I call him like, he's always like the first responder in the community sense, right? And he's like always there, putting ego aside and just doing what's just for people, um, yeah, any moment in time, no matter who they are. And so that's what made me think of that. And, to do some of that work, uh, I think about, I asked him, I remember like, why did you start doing the work you have been doing your whole life? And you think about purpose. My dad said he knew what his purpose was the day Martin Luther King died. He was in his mother's house as soon as, I forgot, Walter Cronkite or something like that. He came on the radio and he was like, hey, he was telling like Martin Luther King was assassinated, etc. And my dad asked my grandmother. This is the story my dad told me, is he asked my grandmother, why would they kill the dreamer, right? And that became his life's mission, is to help provide people, like a voice to the voiceless, like and that kind of work. And so that's what made me think of my dad, and kind of just still doing that work right today, which is to me like a true commitment to an assignment, and not deviating from that, no matter like the turmoil, like the turbulence, none of that. Like the commitment to that has never wavered, and it all comes back to like truly doing what's just, or pursuing justice for all. So,
what influence like that and his established relationship with the Nation of Islam, like what influence did that have on you as a kid, and does it have on you today?
Yeah, I mean it has a big one, right? Because I've always looked at people in the world really differently, because even as like a black man, African American man today, like there's all these conversations that happen around, stereotyping or expectations, whether that's external or internal to the community, right? And so my dad, through the Nation, it helped provide for me like this true framework of like, hey, you can go do better, but don't forget, like, there are others that need you, that are, they look like you and or they don't look like you, right? That you need to, to pour into, because your village is pouring into you and is expecting you, essentially to return, right? And then when I think about today, it's like when I was in high school, I started a mentoring group because there were only 13 African Americans in my graduating class,
How
right?
big was your class?
My graduating class was 500,
Oh, wow.
like, give or take, right? And so you think about that, and I was talking to one of those guys, um, when I moved back to Minneapolis. We met up for coffee, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, Will, how many of those 13 went to college?" And we were sitting there, we were like, "Well, we can't have that. It's not going to take us that long to figure this out, right?" But I couldn't remember, like, just who did what. And it ended up being like 4 that went to school, like, to college, any college, doesn't matter, 4-year, 2-year, doesn't matter. Technical, it didn't matter. And I said, "How many of those finished?" He was like, "Well, 2 are at the table, and then there's a third, um, who finished as well." So you think about it, I'm like, man. And so back to your question, it's that influence on me is like, look, everything I do, I have an intent to give it back somewhere, somehow, right? And even this, not just the book, but like whatever I do, I have this. It's kind of like when my dad heard, like, why they killed the dreamer. It's, and committing your life to doing something greater to help others. I'm kind of in that same vein of every action I take, every step I take, every breath I have is going to be to, to help somebody else or help my community and that doesn't mean like just Black people, just the people I connect with on a daily basis, to feel like they can do more, we can do more, and we can do a lot more and do better together. So that's kind of the spirit and sort of influence that my dad's had on me over the last 28 years, since that's my whole life. So
That's cool.
it's
That's
been strong.
That's very cool. And what you just highlighted, like just from your high school class,
Yeah.
is I think, and I got to get the numbers. I was actually just in a call, and a guy brought this up. The disparity between the number of African Americans graduating from high school and going to college, and then when you look at the prison numbers between that and like white Americans, like that's like when we talk about the opportunity, like we can talk about racism and we talk about everything else around it, but like talking about the opportunity to succeed in America, like, well, education's not like education system's not perfect, but if you want to get a seat at the table, like you got to
Yeah.
be you got to start somewhere. You got to start with education, and like that's 3 out of 30. Like that's not.
It's not. I mean, and that's pure, I'm just saying pure African American, like not trying to go into all the other ethnicities and
Right,
et
right,
cetera.
right.
That's
Man, I gotta
African American.
count
Yeah.
mine because we had. I want to say we were 15 at a 181. But I think
we were 1 out of 340.
I think we were 100% on college though, but we were like a college prep school, so it's kind of like you're messing up.
Yeah. This was like city high school,
Yeah.
like largest high school in the state.
Now, like, is this what your dad has always done full time, or does he have like a
This is it.
job?
No.
So,
Go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
No. So yeah, he started off doing like he was with the Minneapolis Human Rights Department. Um, Prior to doing, his time, I think it was like 13, 14 years at the city of St. Paul. So his whole life has been around human civil rights community for the last 40 years. And that includes like gang summits. He organized a group from here back in 95, 94, 95, the group of men that went to the Million Man March. And so, I mean, it's always been, this commitment to true like human civil rights for the last 4 decades.
So the reason I asked that is like Rodney and I have gone through this as it relates to our work and our endeavor to be on our own, doing our own business, doing the things that we're trying to do as this podcast grows and all of the other things. But when we grew up, Like it was very much like get a job, right?
Right.
Get a job, make money, support family, and do that. Like that's the DNA that has been ingrained in me, and I'm fighting that to get it out, right? Because it's like it doesn't reconcile with my purpose.
hmm
And but you had the opposite example, but now you do these things and have a job. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, like
Well, was
what
it the
is
opposite example though? I mean,
well, the example of like, I mean, he had a job, but he went with his passion. Like he followed from what it sounds like. It's like this is what he believed in. This was his righteousness. This was his purpose on this planet versus just having a job. And you're trying to do all of that stuff too, but then
hmm
you have a corporate job. Like
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
curious to how
number one
what's that
investor.
pull for you? Yeah, that's right. Number one investor. Like,
Yeah.
how does that? There's a question in there. It's not super clear, but it sounds like you got it when I'm putting
Yeah.
it out
No. I mean, I've always had this. I call it like this internal struggle of like um the corporate guy, but the entrepreneur, like the hustler, the guy that's like, I just want to define my own path. I don't need anything else, and I'll just figure it out. Um, but like I grew up that way too. My mom worked at General Mills for 20 plus years, and so I've had the what I call like the my dad, who's I feel like he's had the opportunity to be very entrepreneurial his whole life, even if it's been in a form of, yes, I work for the city, but I'm doing what I want to do, right? And like he's consulted and all that as well. Um, and so it's like he's been in that space. And then my mother was like the offset, right? Of we're gonna get good education, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna go to undergrad, blah blah blah, and corporate. and it's funny because I I have been trained that way, and I've also taken some of the learnings that my dad has around like the relationships that he builds. Even now, like he's like I don't know if he's retired or not. I'm trying to figure this out. Uh,
It's
I
like
can't.
it's like a question mark.
Yeah, it's like I don't know yet because it's like he's working, right? But it's
Yeah.
like he also can go play tennis with me at like 3 in the afternoon for like an hour and a half. But I have that struggle every day, and I know I was joking with you guys with how I feel about our corp jobs, right? But at the end of the day, for me now, it's there's opportunity, and I tell my mom this all the time is I'm a corporatepreneur.
There's actually a term. It's
Yeah,
entrepreneur.
yeah.
There's a
No,
term
yeah,
for it.
yeah, entrepreneur, and that's me. And until I get to a point where, um, I'm really ready to, sort of separate the two, and go full throttle into one, then I will. I have a unique perspective on it though, because like my stepfather has a business, like a medium-sized company that, um, I worked at for a couple years, and I learned a ton about entrepreneurship from the form of, hey, this is a family business, and it's not like a mom and pop type business. It's like 600 plus employees. Like it's like for real payroll. Like, like it's a serious.
Yeah.
And then I was able to see like the other side of that entrepreneurship in that perspective, and in the terms of like this is also a company, right? And so it's like my perspective is really unique in that regard, where even though I work in a corporate job now, I never feel like I'm really bound to the corporation like that, because of
Do
how
you feel
because
like
my
one path is right for you or wrong, or do you feel like there is a balance to be struck, or
I think for me at least, it's like I used to feel like, man, I gotta go do a corporate job. If I don't do that, I have not fulfilled like my obligation to like my mother. Like, but as I've grown, and I think as she's seen me grow, and my interests have evolved, my relationships have expanded, and the equity in those relationships has deepened or increased. Like I think this is what happens. Like people really need to get to a point of like, can I curse on this show?
Yeah.
Because
absolutely? I'm going
right,
there later,
If
probably.
if you
Oh,
feel it.
like I gotta pause myself. I'm gonna get going in a second.
Yeah, we're
But no, I think people really have to get to a point of saying, I'm gonna really bet on me, right? And that's the hardest part. Is like the comfort of a corporate job
Mhm.
is real. Like it's really real. And I've been at a point where I'm like, I can't get rid of the comfort, because the comfort comes with like stay fit and like like all like all these benefits that you get with corporate jobs, and you're
The
like health,
golden.
yeah, healthcare. It's like this
What did we
golden.
call it? The
Uh,
golden prison
I
these
call it, yeah,
days?
because they
Yeah.
call it golden handcuffs, and then there's the golden parachute for the execs, but I'm calling it the golden prison, like because it just
Yeah.
they're enticing, man. They keep you, they keep. I don't want to speak negatively about it because I'm not intending to be negative, but if you are trying to bet on yourself and you're trying to make a leap to do something on your own and you're within it, it can be, I found in my experience, very difficult to rid myself of those trappings.
Yeah. No, that's a nice way to put it. But I really think that for me, like, I think the day is gonna come where you have to take that risk for sure. And to your point, like that leap, like everybody that works that's entrepreneurial at a corporate job is like standing on a cliff. They have the parachute on. They're like, today is that day. I'm gonna jump off this
Some
bad
of them just
boy.
have the squirrel suit without a parachute.
And they're like, I'm gone, right? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And you see people do it all the time. But what they're doing is they take their learnings from their corporate experience and they go and, you see it all the time in technology, right?
Mhm.
They'll go and turn it into a partner or a company, and then they end up, the former company is now the customer.
Yep.
Right. And so in a lot of aspects, like that's how I have thought about, and I know I thought about like, what I do, which is like I'm gonna learn as much as I can, um, and while managing my workload, right? Like every role I've been in, I've tried to figure out how can I manage my time, to be able to, even during the day, and I think this is fair, to balance being extremely productive, um, from a corporate perspective, et cetera, but also being able to really pour into some of these other things that give me like fulfillment, and ultimately what I would say like freedom from the corporate golden prison.
Um, so your parents are divorced. You mentioned
Yeah.
your stepdad. When did they get divorced?
My parents got divorced when I was 7.
How'd that play?
How'd
that play on you? And like,
It was not good. I when I was, from the time I can remember to that moment, I remember it clear as day. In the basement, my sister was sitting right next to me. She was 11 at the time.
How were you?
And
You said you were 7?
I was 7 and my sister was 11. And there was this conversation about, hey, we're not going to be together anymore. There's going to be some changes, et cetera. And so, I'm like, I am smart for a 7-year-old, but I'm not fully processing like what this really means. I think my sister understood, and so for a short period, like she kind of protected me from what was happening, I think, between them. And then there was a moment in time where it was like, hey, you're gonna live with your dad, and I'm gonna live, like she was gonna live with my mom. So I was like, this is strange, right? And so essentially, like the divorce created. I feel like I grew up in a sense like as an only child, even with a sibling, and like that's been hard, like even as adults, right? Like if you fast forward to our adulthood, there were so many years in between where it's like she was growing up in Maryland while I was in Minnesota, like in middle school, high school. And then I was like, well, I miss my mom, right? Now I'm like mentally traumatized because I'm like, I miss my mom, but I want my dad. Like, when I was younger, I was more into athletics than academics, which is whatever, not good for if they're younger people, focus on both. Or
Yeah,
but
do your books
yeah,
and
go
your
to school. But at the time, like my dad was a sports guy, right? Like, um, great basketball player. That's part of how he got to Minnesota. Was from a basketball scholarship, etc. And so just growing up with the divorce, it was like the boys were together and the girls were together. You grow up separate kids. Kind of lifestyles are different. If you think about like the faith part involved in that, like dad and I, we'd go to church every Sunday. And then my sister, she was kind of off into, she had to like explore herself spiritually on her own, even with her, connectivity to dad from afar. And so she was kind of left with the influence of the Nation of Islam, which clearly was strong, because she converted. Not to necessarily the nation, but she practices the Islamic faith. So um, it was different, right? And there was a moment where I think at the end of the 7th grade, I moved to Columbia, Maryland with my mom. So I lived with my mom and my sister for 3 years, from 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And at that point, like I basically said, well, there's basketball's out the window because all I care about is being with my mother. There was a moment of frustration where even, and I haven't really shared this much with people outside of like close folks, but I'll answer your question like 100%. And so there was a moment even with my mother where like I was considering like suicide, right? Because I was like mentally I was fatigued, right? And emotionally I was fatigued.
How old were you?
Because I was in I think 9th grade, so like 8th or 9th grade. There I had first
You
moved.
had two, so you were like 11, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I've never been good with that.
I'm not
Like,
good at
Grade's
it.
usually like 13 years old.
Yeah,
13,
so I,
okay.
Teenage,
So you had-
yeah,
you had-
13, 14 years
You had
old.
4.
yeah.
I'm close.
So I'm in this vulnerable space at let's say 13, because I'm trying to piece it all together, and I'm trying to have this sort of perfect world that I used to have, which is 2 parents, my sister, right? And that's what I knew. And over the years, I was trying to figure it out. And then moving with my mother was hard too because she was a single mom, uh, and she was consulting at the time, so she had her own consulting business, so she was always traveling, right? And so, at that point, my sister she's on her way to college, my freshman year. So we were kind of cool. It's like my freshman year of high school was her freshman year of college. So it's kind of like this 4-year separation all the time. And so that led me to being alone in Maryland, right? So my whole intent was I want to be with my sister, my mom. My sister graduates from high school. She's gone. Mom's traveling. And now here I am in a new place, getting to know new people and by myself essentially. And so that led me to getting into things I wasn't supposed to. I remember at the time, one of my mom's clients was Heineken. It was the first time I had beer. I was like 14. I was like, yo, there's this mom's out of town having a house party. Like if you lived in Maryland or the East Coast, they're big into like go-go and house music. I'm from the Midwest. I'm like, yo, I don't know what this stuff is. Like, it sounds nice, but whatever. And so I'm having this house party. There's this big bottle of beer, like a promotional beer, and it was like 3 feet tall, Heineken bottle. I had all these people at the house. I'm like, I know it was like clearly something like my mother would notice is missing, right?
Fill it up with water and put the cap
Yeah.
back on, right?
Yeah, it was all bad. All these things, it was terrible. And I just remember that like clear as day, and I was just into so many things like
How
as a
did
14-year-old.
how did how did you work through that? How did you get through that? And also thank you for sharing that. Like that's it. Yeah, thank you.
No, I mean, for me at the time, it was I had a therapist. I went to counseling.
Did you tell somebody that you were feeling that way?
Yeah, I taught my sister. My sister actually somehow or another, like she was like on her way home from school or something, and like I remember I was in the kitchen with a knife and all that. I remember clear as day.
Oh, so you actually were like,
Yeah, I was committed. Like I was.
you had intent, and
You had
you were
a
like,
plan.
Yeah,
Intent.
yeah. And my sister
it
walks in the house and I like freak out. Right, I'm like, oh shoot, like I wasn't expecting you home, right? Like,
oh, so like she wasn't necessarily
she
supposed to
just
be home at
walked
that
in on
point.
no,
you.
yeah, she was just on her way home from school or somewhere, and she was just coming home. So like when I think back to like spirituality and stuff today, it's like that's an example of
For sure.
somebody stopped that from happening because I had a different assignment and I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now, right? And so from counseling to just a lot of counseling, family support, right? And then I actually ended up moving back to Minneapolis. My junior year of high school, I moved back to Minneapolis with my dad.
Did you talk to your mom about this? Like you said,
Yeah.
your sister. Okay.
Yeah,
Like
so mom was
how
well.
shortly how'd that all play out?
It wasn't good. Like I kind of felt like it was her fault. Like even though it wasn't, right? Like I redirected sort of my pain and my discontent with how the decisions they made as adults to break up our family. Like I was like I didn't feel like I had a place in all of this or a say, right? And all these decisions that impacted our family. And that transitioned into me saying like I don't want to be around you. Like I love you, but I'm leaving. Like I'm going back to be with dad, right? Like I made up that mind, like in my mind, like I met some great people there, but like the vibrations here are not for me. I need to go. Um, and my dad, he was even at that during my time there, he was, back to the sports thing. Like our whole plan was like, hey, basketball, this is it. Play tennis for in the spring. That's just to keep the cardio good for basketball. Like in the fall, like in AAU in the summer. Yeah, exactly. And so, I moved back home, and the intent was, okay, we missed 3 years of for real AAU, and I call it like the Terrell system. And that's a conversation for another day. But my junior year, like I come back like varsity and all these things, and I like basically break my ankle. And at that point, I was like, it's over, right? Like mentally, I was like, I'd rather just focus on school. Basketball is done. And so for me and dad, that caused some friction because he's a like big basketball family. And so that created some tension when I moved back home. But otherwise, like, that's what happened.
I'm really curious.
Yeah.
Because you say in your book that your family has a recognizable ability to deflect pain, confusion, angst, or anything that resembles weakness.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
Tying that, like, I mean, given the fact that you are where you are, I think if when you read the book, Collision Course, you'll realize the obviously speaking to the audience here, you'll realize Phil's path out of this. But during that time, we just talked to a guest about depression, and in suicide prevention, it's critical when someone has ability, intent, and a plan, and you reached that stage.
Yeah.
Then you talk about breaking your ankle and wanting to give, like, with that family dynamic, like, how did you manage this as a adolescent? Like, how did you work through this and come out better for it?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to like, and I credit my sister for this, because I always watched her, directly or indirectly, right? Like I always was like, if she's doing something, I'm gonna do something similar. Like she played tennis in high school, she played basketball in high school, she played soccer. Like she's way more of an academic than I was in high school, like honor roll and all these things. And so my intent was like, I'm gonna figure out how I can do those things. Like to make if I don't make anyone proud in this scenario, because I felt like, oh, she saved me, right? Because she walked in when I was getting ready to end it, right? And she walks in, and so all of it, and I've never like fully articulated this to her, but like a lot of that was for everything to me is really for her because like she hasn't been there, right? But she was there in the most important time, right? And that's more about like she saved me. And so like when to answer the question, it's like I always thought like, well, what would Whitney do? That's my sister. Like, what would Whitney do? Like if Whitney can deal with this, and she lived with my mom, so she grew up like an only child. If she had to see her brother in that moment, or I don't know what else she dealt with, right? Right, some stuff, but like that kind of was like the North Star for me was, look, my sister gave me an opportunity um, to finish, kind of what I've started right now with high school, and sports didn't work out, and she had that connection as well where moving didn't help her, right? Because dad, again, like the athletic person, so some of her dreams were like I call it deferred in that sense. Um, so I credit a lot of that through those times to my sister, and I think like I started to develop a sense of faith, but I just couldn't put a finger on what it was at the time, and I think that pulled me through, and I didn't know it was happening. And I've grown up like especially here in St. Paul in the Twin Cities, and in a true village. Like I can really say like I've grown up in a community that's like, no, you're gonna do this. Like you're gonna be fine, right? And I credit like the local coffee shop called Golden Time, which is right in an old historic African American neighborhood here in the Twin Cities, well in St. Paul. And I would go to this coffee shop every day. Every day after school, I'd walk from my high school, Central High School, 3 blocks, and I go to this coffee shop every day, and I would see like community leaders or older people I've seen it around high school or in the city or whatever, just like being positive and doing good things. And that also was like people were like loving on me, and I was like, okay, that means I can love on myself, right? And I can I can do more. So long answer, but I think it's
That's good.
those things.
I want to talk about accountability for a
Yeah.
minute. Keith and I have been having this conversation about extreme ownership and accountability and all the everything is my fault. And you mentioned in the book, well, it's called Collision Course. There's a collision, and you talk
Yeah.
about actually questioning. I don't know if there was anger or just questioning your brothers, your friends, for letting you get behind the wheel.
And
Yeah.
the bar for serving you your
Yeah.
old fashions that you love.
I
Yeah.
do love some old fashions.
Yeah.
I'm a
Me too.
Manhattan guy myself, but
Yeah.
I've tempered it. I had a great old fashioned. You said Manhattan, it made me think of Manhattan Beach, but
you just went down the street.
I had a great old at Strands. It was great.
Oh,
Anyway.
it's strange. Yeah. We'll have to.
Yeah.
But you question them, and which I mean, I think it's probably a normal response. But how did you, like, what was that process like? So you get in this accident after drinking,
Mhm.
and you share the process of like what you're going through in that moment. But later, when you're questioning the scenario and like, how did I get here and that kind of stuff, like, and you're questioning them, like, what was that like?
Yeah, I was, and I'll tell you all the truth. Like, I was pissed, right? Like, I was hot because, um, I felt like, and I'm the youngest of this group, right? And I don't, and I don't think I say that in the book, but if you think about like being a youngest of 8 brothers, for example, like your feeling will always be like, you guys are supposed to protect me, right? Like that's how was my reaction and how I felt. I'm like, you guys didn't protect me, even though I should have protected myself because I'm a grown man. But it's like, you guys should have been there. Though. You should have been like, no, right? And you guys didn't like. This is how I felt. Like you guys got behind the wheel too. So I was like, we all felt it was okay, right? But we all didn't assume the accident. Like we all didn't get that. I got that, right? And so I used to feel like, well, I have that. And then when I was going through it, not to say like they weren't there, but like they weren't there. Like they were there
I know that
when
feeling.
they were there when we were cutting the check though, right? Like when the drinks were flowing and things, but like when it first happened, it was almost like, oh shit, like he's on his own, right? Like I was spared from having to deal with that. So let me know when you're done almost. Like
Did you have any
and
conversations with them about it, or have you had any conversations with them about it?
yeah, it's so this group of friends, like we're all tight. We all went to school together. 7 of the 8 guys, we're actually all frat brothers. So we all joined a fraternity at the same time. So the bond is really strong. And we always say like we became men together, right? And so um, we had a conversation after it happened. I had a conversation separately with the 2 guys that were in the car with me, um, which even on their behalf, right? Like I feel like they should have said something in particular because they should have been like, I'm not getting in the car, right? Like, like there's these little micro moments where you're like, man, the decision, like if we had to put like a decision tree up, it's like, man, these are all bad. Like these are all bad decisions. Um, and there's technology, like, and that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I had that conversation in a lot of different ways at different altitudes. Um, but they were all around like at the end of the day, the accident has happened. Um, I am dealing with the repercussions of my own decision because at the end of the day, I shouldn't have done it. Right? Like if you guys want to drive and all, like even if I say no, like fine, but I shouldn't have gotten behind the wheel. Like I had more. Not to say they didn't have anything at stake, but I knew what would happen if something happened to the car, which there was a residual. It like there were just so many repercussions that I wasn't thinking about in the moment, right? Which like how could I? But it's just like when you think about it now, it's like man, if they knew
I
what I had to lose, they wouldn't have let me get behind the wheel.
I
Kinda.
I don't share this very frequently, but I got a DUI in college,
Mm.
and for the longest time, I was very upset about it. Like I felt like the reason I got pulled over had nothing to do with me. I passed all the sobriety tests. Like, I had all these. I was just like, why is this even happening to me? And then my friends, similar to you, like they bugged out. Like
Yeah.
there was a gap, right? It was just like we reconnected when all the legal stuff was done, and
Right.
like I done my time and paid my debt and all that goodness, and I was real mad about it. But it's like at the end of the day, like now at the end of the day, I realized that like I didn't have to drive, I didn't have to get in the car.
Yeah.
You know,
You had this accident.
Yeah.
Drinking and driving.
kids,
Yeah.
don't do
Yeah. Don't do
it.
that. Do not
Don't
do it.
And you have this family dynamic.
Yep.
Right. And you talk about it in the book, but you allude to it. And I want to really understand. Like, you had to battle, but maybe not battle, but you struggled with the family perception. You wrecked the car your parents got you for graduating. Like, what
Nice car.
was that experience? And what, like, and we talk about when you were 13, and you talk about breaking your ankle, and you talk about your relationship with your sister. Like, but what got you through that? And what was that? What was that situation with your family? What was it like?
Yeah. So, and I'll just talk from the perspective of like after the accident and that dynamic. So that the accident was like an explosion, like in like internally from the family perspective, and it was. And I mentioned like the family business, so like the car was connected to the business, and so like that's a
as
dynamic
in
that
like it was insured by the business, or it was
yes,
Mm.
So it was like
So-
a company car. In a
it was
way.
basically like it was a company car, and
So you
I
do
was
allude
n-
to that in there. You talk about
Mhm.
yeah, and so it's like the the connection between the car and the company, like they weren't like completely separate things. They were real connected, right? To the intent that it was like this is detrimental, potentially detrimental to the business.
Did you understand that prior to the accident?
I understood that it was the scenario of like the company car part, right? But like I wasn't thinking like, oh, like
Liability.
If I get into a
yeah,
wreck,
like
if I
yeah,
wreck
like
it,
yeah, it's like oh, it's on me. When it's like
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's not actually.
Huh.
And then like at that time it's like you're 23, like you're driving this car, like the policy on you and whatever we have in the company like is high risk, like whatever, and all these. So I didn't think about all these things, and it just basically created this. It was the catalyst for like this downhill. Like, it was everything went bad like
What?
ASAP.
Explain it. Like
So-
talk
So
about
good
that. Help us
example, like
understand.
when the accident happens, right? So you think about like my stepdad,
Mhm.
right? Like so my stepdad was pissed, right? And not like I'm mad, that you were drinking and driving, like not that kind of mad. He was like, there's so much accountability, back to the accountability thing, like and responsibility that you have as someone connected to the business, that you should know better, almost like you should know better. And it became this hostile conversation between the two of us because I'm thinking like, hey, like let's relax. Like I'm 23, I'm still here, like it's all good. Like it's a car, right? That's how I was thinking at the time. And he's thinking it's a business, right? Like this is what I've been working to build for the last 27 years.
He's thinking it could
and
cost the business.
and it could cost the business. And he's like, which means that costs 600 people their livelihoods, which changes how I live, which changes how your mother lives, which changes whatever else he's got going on. He's like, and the business has going on. He's like, but you're thinking about what happened to you, right? And so that was the conversation that was happening. And so even in that moment, like I had this opportunity to realize, like, he's right, right? And it took some arguments, it was knockdown drag out. Like I resigned, like it was a whole thing, and it was like legal, like, and I was like, my like human rights have been violated. My dad got involved, like it was crazy, right? Like
Wow.
so then like they were going at it a little bit,
I'm
and
sure they get along just fine.
they do now.
Oh, they do now.
Right?
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
But like in the heat of the moment, it's like I'm right and he's right, right? Like everybody's entitled to feeling like they're right, in the moment, and it just created this, this bumping of heads often. And then if you think about the person in the middle, his mom, right? And mom and I didn't know this at the time, and if I did, I was ignorant to it on I think intentionally because I didn't want to have to deal with that. Is like she was dealing with her own things, like mentally and physically and everything, and it's like I'm so busy focused on what I got going on and trying to be right that I'm actually hurting her, right? And I don't even know it because I'm so focused on like he's wrong, I like whatever, and dealing with all that kind of stuff, um and that became another situation that I think I'm not gonna say I created, but I amplified when it came to like my mother. Then you have just other family members involved. So that's what I meant by just so much was transpiring. And then I was like, I'm out of here, right? Like I had a house in Atlanta at the time. So I bought a house when I moved back from Chicago. So I was 23. I buy this house off of a recommendation from my stepdad. Like he's like, this is a smart move, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, equity, I get it, ownership. I'm like, I'm 23 though. Like this is a pad. This is I don't know. Like I'm not cutting the grass and all that, man. Like you know. And so I think about all these things, and I'm like, I was trying to at that time in my life, I was trying to be something that I wasn't even ready to be, and I didn't even put in any work to get right. And so, like getting a car like that, or like a house like they paid me more. Like I got a bonus, so I could just buy the house. So it was like the business was giving me so much, but I decided to throw that all away by just getting in the car, drinking and driving when I know better, right? Now that's of course, like in reflection, but that's what happened, and that's what I meant by like it was a lot.
Yeah. What did you take? Like you talk about the conflict,
Yeah.
right? Like that idea of I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. Like navigating through that. Like, is there a takeaway from that people could learn from? Because I think there's a lot of situations that we all experience with I'm right, and like this is stuff that Rodney and I are trying to break down through everything that we're doing. So I'm curious, like, do you have something from that you took away in that experience that you try to avoid going forward?
Yeah, and I think what I learned, and hopefully maybe it lands with somebody, is like I learned that everyone can be right, right? Like we all can win, but it's like the approach, to winning. It's like, can you win gracefully, right, and respectfully? And I established this level of like humility in the process because it's like I was humbled, like in a lot of different ways, and like the accident definitely did that. Like later on, but I even think in the moment in the fire with my stepdad, he was he was helping me humble myself because he wasn't trying to like really hurt me by taking away like a job or anything like that. Um, like he was trying to help me see like if you ever get in a moment where you built something and somebody, no matter who it is, tries to take that away, you're gonna always feel some type of way, right? Like always. So what I learned in the situation was like, if step outside of that moment and just observe and listen to all the sides, right? Before you react, like be patient in the steps you take, because you actually might be agreeing, right? And you don't even know it, right? Because you're so focused on I have to win, but it's like, but did you listen? Right? Like, were
It's
you really?
interesting you say that because, like, you're right. You were alive. It was just a car. Like,
Yeah.
but like, okay, step one, like that allowed you to have a conversation with him so he could explain the other implications of that accident.
Which I learned, right?
Yeah.
And now, like, now today, when I even think about, man, like one day, if I have a company like that and I have to deal with company cars and such, like, I'll now
You have a
now it's
different
like
perspective.
I have a different perspective on what that means and the impact. And
You're gonna have stickers on the dash.
yeah,
Don't
like,
drink and drive.
no, you're like,
Just a little
think of
breathalyzer
me.
thing. They're gonna be
Think of me.
automatic cars by then. So
You're gonna have your book
self-driving.
just take like audio
glove
books
box.
in the glove.
Just hit play if you're drinking.
If you're drinking, press
don't
play.
don't read the chapter "Stay Lit" because you're only gonna remember the 2 words "Stay Lit," and I don't
Right.
want
It's
you to
like,
do
no,
it.
that's not
Like,
that's not the actual.
yeah,
That's
don't do
right.
that.
Yeah.
In this path, right? Like this like fast forward or rewind before all of the conflict blew up. You mentioned that when you were in the holding cell, how long were you in the holding cell?
Oh man, I think I was in there for like 8,
Can I say something?
8 hours.
Fuck holding cells, by the way.
Man,
That'll let you know about your life real quick. Like
yeah, real
either I'm
fast.
cut out for this life or I'm not.
I'm not. Yeah, and I knew right then, yo, Philip, this is not you, brother. You're not made for this. And you know what though? Even in that cell though, like I was in there for 7, 8 hours. Like when I was sitting in there, it gave me an appreciation for like truly like all the things that I did have, right? Because like I was
you
talking.
surely didn't have them in that moment.
No, I was like, I don't have anything in here. I'm just one of these guys in here that's like, oh shit.
Man, I talked to some people. There was a dude who got
Yeah,
dude who got picked up. He just pulled off a drive by. There was some crackhead. Like there were some
Oh, yeah.
people.
Well, like, cause this is what fascinates me about your quote. You said after you talked to some people, you realized I could still be great.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I knew.
How
Well,
did you realize that in that?
yeah, like what about those conversations or those people made you realize you could still be great?
because I mean I was in there with some young guys, and I was in there with a couple of older guys that were just like, this is like their recurring offense, like they were like repeat offenders.
Lifetimers, like they were.
Yeah, like they were like, and he was just like, there's one guy, I don't remember his name, older guy, kind of just say like it seemed like he like an OG, like just we're just sitting there, and I kind of don't mind talking to anyone. Doesn't matter who they are, where they are. He asked me, he's like, "What are you in here?" Like, you kind of getting this little,
Like, why are you here?
yeah, like why are you, like, why are you here? And I told him, and he was just like, man, he was almost like, that's nothing. Like,
Yeah.
like, and I'm like, yeah, kind of, but in my mind, I'm like, but it's everything, right?
Yeah.
And he was telling me about his story, like he was like, I don't know what he did something ridiculous, but it's like not the first time he's done it, and he was just telling me like, he's like, I got into a cycle that I couldn't get out of, right? And I don't know how to get out of it. He's like, and this is my life. Like I come in here, I do my time. If they let me out, I go back out. If not, I'm probably gonna be in they call it like Gen Pop. And yep, yeah. I'll be in Gen Pop, and I'll survive that way. And then if I get you released, that's great. If not, I have to figure out how to survive in here. And he's like, you're not this guy though, right? Like, and I was telling him about it, my experience. He's like, have you ever been to jail and all that? I was like, no. The only times I've ever been to jail were like my dad would, with the work he was doing, like I would visit or whatever. I had an uncle that was a police chief, so it was like, not really been in there, but I've been like scared by them. And it helped, like that was just one conversation. Even like younger guys that were in there, younger than me. At the time, I was 23. These guys were like 19, 18, like 21. I'm thinking like, man, like you guys are like just adults. Like what are you doing in here? And I'm thinking like, man, I got to get out of here. Like, and I don't ever want to come back. And if I come back, it's to inspire or to help or to do something else, yeah. And that's what I say, like I could still be great is because like I don't have to be defined by this moment, but I can take an appreciation for everything that happens after this. So I don't come back here in this certain type of a circumstance. And I haven't been, and I'm grateful for that.
So I don't know why I'm compelled to do it, but I'm following the things that compel me. So normally we ask our guests, normally we ask the question, like at the end, if you were going to leave our audience with one thing, what would it be? But I kind of want to pivot. And I want to ask you, like, if you were to tell your sister one thing that you would want in perpetuity for her to be able to listen to forever and all time, what would that be?
That's a good question. I think I would put it this way. We're not defined by the decisions of our predecessors. And that I love her, right? Like, those two things, for sure.